good morning, Zootown. As Bryce said, my name is James, and I get to bring the Word of God to you today. And I just want to start by saying, this morning the worship team just spoke to my heart. It doesn't happen every week. It's always really good music, but boy, the Spirit just opened my heart. So a big thanks to our worship team, and thank you, God, for just breaking me open and putting some tears in my eyes. Speaking of tears and eyes, it is student move-in weekend for the University of Montana, and so just want to say welcome. If you are a family dropping off a student, welcome. We're glad that you're here, and I can relate a little bit to remembering the time that your child was a toddler or fighting in the car with siblings on a family vacation, and the change that this is. So it's a big deal. We are entering in with that with prayer, and also just want to invite anyone who's coming for school or who's in the age range of like 18 to 26-ish. Our young adults group meets on Monday nights at our house. I'm James. My wife is Jerry Lynn. She's over here. And so we host that group. We're going to start that on August 25th, which is Monday, a week from tomorrow. About 7 o'clock, and so just come and catch one of us or check in at the Hello booth if you're interested in that. With it being back to school as well, Zootown Youth is going to have a little back to school gathering also at our house. It says on our little summer calendar that it's at the church, but we'll have that at our house from 6 to 8 on this Wednesday the 20th, and so hopefully, if you are middle school or high school age, you can join us for that, and we'll, kind of celebrate the end of summer, if that's what we celebrate. Look forward to back to school, if that's what we look forward to. But as summer kind of dwindles, as the sun is setting earlier and earlier, my son's one real birthday request, his birthday's in July, and he requested a camping trip, and I got to go along with my son and 3 of his friends, and Caleb, who preached last week and is one of our youth leaders. And let's just say tent camping hits different at 43 than at 23, or even at 33. I learned that you can have hot dogs as a breakfast food. As I thought about it, it's not that different from sausage. So, if you need permission for that, it's granted. There's grace for you for having hot dogs for breakfast. But what a great time. We fished for, I think, 6 hours total and caught seaweed, and it was a blast. But as we come into the message today, we're in this series, Joseph Living the Dream. And we've experienced the life of Joseph in these little segments of what was going on in his life and kind of the way that God was faithful to him and the ways that Joseph kind of committed to being faithful to God, even in terrible situations. The last time I was up here, I was preaching the first message of the series, and I talked kind of about the generational trauma leading up to Joseph's story. And then Raleigh preached for us, and he gave this great overview of the dynamic of Joseph with his brothers. And of course, they're all jealous of each other. Joseph was the favorite. There was a lot of hatred there. And they wind up throwing him into a pit and then selling him into slavery. And then Bryce shared the next week about the dynamics of Joseph when he was in slavery. He's falsely accused, and yet God remains faithful to him. And so we see God faithful to Joseph in the pit, when he's in slavery, when he's falsely accused, when he's thrown in prison. Ty preached the next week on how Joseph was forgotten in prison. He has this great moment where he interprets these dreams, and then the person who says, his one request for interpreting these dreams was, remember me and talk about me to Pharaoh maybe. That might help my situation a little bit as I'm helping yours. And the guy totally forgets about him. And then Caleb Wren, the H is silent, by the way, for all of you out there. I made that mistake last week. Caleb preached on how Joseph was finally found and favored and brought to this position where he had almost all the power in the kingdom. he was given basically the rights to govern over all the food in the kingdom. And so Joseph's story arc, right, goes like he was in this high place, he like hits the pits literally, and then he kind of gradually makes his way up, and now he's in this position of power. And that's where he left off last week. And it's really cool because you see God's faithfulness through this whole story. And if we really look at Joseph's story, what we see is it is a story about trauma and resilience in this kind of spiritual manner of God being faithful to Joseph, Joseph being faithful to God. It's a story about God's grace and love all through Joseph's life in every situation that he finds himself in. But it's also a story, and this is where today's message breaks in, about a family. It's not just Joseph's story. It's a story about a family, the family through whom God is doing all of his miraculous work. And that's really what you see throughout Genesis, is you kind of trace this family history of all these people who are really, really, really screwed up. And yet God is still choosing them and God is still using them. And these incredible things are happening to preserve this line of God's people. And so all of this comes together through the whole series in kind of the dynamics that we look at today. There is real pain and real trauma in Joseph's story. He is betrayed by his family, thrown into a literal pit. He goes into literal slavery. He is put in a real prison. He is forgotten in that prison. And yet there's also real purpose and real triumph in Joseph's story. Joseph is put in charge everywhere that he is. Right? He's in his family's home and he's like the exalted son. He gets the special coat. He goes to be sold into slavery and he's put in charge of the entire household as a slave. He gets thrown into prison and the warden trusts him with everything in the prison. He interprets Pharaoh's dreams and he's trusted with everything in the kingdom with regard to these 7 years of lots of food and 7 years of famine. And so Joseph essentially, when we leave him in the story and where we pick up today, is he is responsible for like the greatest food distribution project in the ancient world. 7 years worth of food he has stored up, and now he will have to give out for 7 whole years. It's a nice job security to have. And the chapter that Caleb preached on ends somewhere interesting. Joseph has these 2 sons. The second son is named Ephraim, which means fruitful, and Joseph was like, God's made me fruitful, which is true. But the first son's name is Manasseh, which means God made me forget. And Joseph says, look, God's made me forget all my trouble and my entire family. And then if you're following along, what we'll see today is kind of like a 90s, early 2000s rom-com that was based on a Shakespeare play. There's like 10 of them. And what you'll see going on is there's all sorts of things that we know as we're reading the story that nobody else in the story knows. And so all this has happened with Joseph. We've just been following Joseph and all the ups and downs of his life. And then all of a sudden the camera fades from Joseph and goes to his dad. And we're like, oh yeah, he has a family. The family that betrayed him. And so it's interesting to me because I see this dynamic in Joseph's story where he has achieved so much. All the layers of all that he's achieved, all that he's responsible for. He's got a new family. He's in a new place. He's got all this power. And what the Bible is telling us is that's not what really matters. It is our relationships that matter. I love how Thomas Merton says it. He says, in the end, it is the reality of personal relationships that saves everything. And that is the dynamic of the story today. And maybe you find yourself in a similar place between these two realities of experiencing something good or something bad, and then the relationship over here may be feeling broken. Maybe you've carried somebody in with you today that you know you need to forgive, and yet you just can't escape the anger that boils up when you think of their name or their face. And this is the company that Joseph is in. Maybe you're here and something just feels naggingly empty for you today. And what this story tells us today as we look at it in Joseph's account is that forgiveness, relationships, reconciling, it is so much messier than we ever give it credit for. So much messier than we ever give it credit for. But so often as we talk about things like forgiveness in church, it's so sugar-coated. All right, I'm going to do something. I'm going to start from the end of the story and then go back through it. But here's where we're going to end the story. It's in Genesis chapter 45, verses 7 through 8, where Joseph tells his brothers, God sent me ahead of you to preserve you on the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it is not you who sent me here, but God. Just a reminder, these are the same brothers who sold him into slavery and threw him into a pit, right? And so often as Christians and in churches, what we do is we're starting today in chapter 42, and what we do is we just jump into chapter 45 and go, look, it's all good. Joseph and his brothers are back together, hurrah. Now you do the same thing in like 2 hours after something happens to you. We bypass, we look at the great response and then like forget all the stuff that Joseph went through to get there. We forget that the journey is ongoing, that it's processing. Right? We hear things like, you should have the faith to be able to forgive this person. I once had a pastor of mine post on Facebook that Jesus forgave everybody while he was being crucified, and if you can't forgive instantly like that, then you're in sin. And I was saying a different word that begins with F than forgiveness. But no. Forgiveness is a process. Forgiveness is a process. Joseph teaches us this. It is years that Joseph is experiencing trauma, really. It is years that Joseph experiences healing. And so this process that he goes through kind of comes to a head for us today as we look at the story. But as we think about forgiving harm done to us, and as we look at what does it mean to receive God's grace in this moment where I struggle with it, we see forgiveness is messy. It is a rocky road. And so here's the story. It is fascinating. I encourage you to go read it. If I read it to you, it would take the whole time in the message, but I encourage you to read it. Genesis chapter 42 through 45. And here's kind of what we see happening. So Joseph is doing great. Camera pans over to his family back home, and they're not doing great. They have run out of food, like everybody else in the area. And so Jacob, the father, says, I'm going to send 10 of my sons. He's going to keep his new favorite son because he thinks Joseph has died. His new favorite son is Benjamin. And he sends his 10 other sons to go find food because they've heard that there's food in Egypt. And so here come these sons who are coming up to Joseph, who sees his exalted position as his redemption, as his freedom from all of his troubles. And they come up to him to buy grain because it's this time of famine. They need the grain to make bread and live. And so the brothers come up to Joseph for grain, and they immediately bow down to him. Now, if you remember the beginning of the story, this is exactly what Joseph dreamed about. The dream that got him in so much trouble is he woke up one morning and said, I had this funny dream, guys. All of you brothers were bowing down to me. And they received that about as well as your sibling would receive it, right? And so here it is actually coming true. And what I want you to notice today is that there are so many moments where there are like trauma responses in the story. You see Joseph at this vulnerable and raw place, even though he's in a place of power. And here's the first one. Joseph sees them bowing down. He recognizes them, but they, of course, have no clue that it's him. And so he remembers his dream. Joseph recognizes them, but in his mind, they are not safe, right? And so he treats them like strangers. And then even worse, he says, I know who you are. You're spies. You're coming to get an account of all the food that's in Egypt, and then you're going to come and invade us and take all of our food. And he imprisons them. He throws them in jail. How's that for like just desserts, right? You ever wanted to just take a sibling who's done something to you and pay them back exactly what they did to you? And so he throws them in prison. And this is such a trauma response. They are not safe to him. And so he is putting up this wall, right? And saying, you've got to get somewhere else. So then he goes into the prison with them, and he starts negotiating with them. And what he's trying to get them to do is to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, back to Egypt. And think about this, right? Joseph knows the dynamics of his family from growing up in it. And the dynamics of the family when he was there was he was the favorite. Now, Joseph had 4 wives, 2 wives and 2 servants who had babies for those wives. Again, Genesis is an awkward book to read for children. And so Jacob's favorite wife, right, is Rachel. Rachel had 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And so Joseph is doing the math in his head, and what he knows is that if he's out of the picture, the new favorite is going to be Benjamin. And so again, this testing is so informed by the traumatic experience of being kidnapped and thrown into a pit and sold into slavery by his brothers. And so in his mind, he's thinking, if you'll bring the favorite child back, I might be able to trust you. And so while they're in jail, the brothers start talking in Hebrew. Now, they don't know that Joseph knows Hebrew, but he hears what they're saying. And he hears Reuben say, guys, this is exactly what we deserve. You remember what we did to Joseph? We threw him in a pit. This is God paying us back for what we did to him. And so Joseph, hearing that, gets so overwhelmed that he just starts to weep. He just breaks down and crying. He has to leave the room and go collect himself. And again, what a trauma response. Can you imagine being Joseph and you're like, if I ever see my brothers again, what's the one thing that you'd want to hear? Right? Something that was regret. And here he is, he hears it in secret. They don't know that he's heard it, but he's holding on to this. And so Reuben was the oldest son. What Joseph decides to do is to keep the next oldest son, whose name is Simeon, to keep him in jail and send everybody else back home with some grain so that they have food. he also puts all of their money back in their bags, right? As if to say, you don't even have to pay for the food. And I don't know, if you've ever experienced something that was a deep hurt and a deep pain, and then the person who was this perpetrator against you comes to you and has some kind of regret, it's like initially there's a part of you that like wants to open your whole heart to them, right? Like you're kind of like, okay, I know you just like really screwed me over, but we could be best friends again. And it's like this initial response of like a little bit of regret goes a long way. And so these 9 brothers go back home. They tell Jacob the whole story and say, all we have to do is bring Benjamin back and we can get more food. But here's the other side of trauma. Jacob, who is the dad, knows what it's meant to lose one of his favorite sons and refuses to let his new favorite go. Now think about this. That means that his second oldest son is still imprisoned in Egypt. And so he's like, it's better to keep one son in prison than to risk losing my new favorite. By the way, those are not healthy family dynamics, just to make it clear to everyone. This is so trauma response. I don't want to risk losing someone else again. See, trauma keeps us in these patterns, right? Joseph continues to see his brothers as perpetrators. When is the moment that they're going to do something to me again? And he has reason to think that. And Jacob is in this pattern of thinking, if I send my favorite son away, I'm going to lose him, just like I lost my other favorite. And the brothers are basically saying, well, we don't want to let dad down again. And so everybody's stuck in this pattern. And meanwhile, all the grain is getting used up and they're going hungry again. And so when they're all out of food, Judah, another brother, comes over to his dad and says, we got to go get some more food. All we have to do is bring Benjamin with us and we'll get more food. And Jacob says, right, again, trauma response. Well, why did you guys tell him all this detail about your lives? Why'd you tell him you had a son named Benjamin? You could have just kept that to yourselves. And he's like raging at his son who's trying to get food for them because he's so afraid. And so what Judah promises his dad is, listen, I will take him. I'll stay right with him. And if anything happens to him, it's on me. And then Jacob says, well, count me dead if anything happens to my son Benjamin. And if you've been in a situation like this, the unhealthy family dynamic that plays out is one where there are favorites and not favorites. There are promises made and broken. There are the dynamics that keep you locked in a pattern of just trying to survive. And what we'll see as the story unfolds is the way that God breaks through even this trauma pattern that seems so unbreakable. And so, just in case they get accused of stealing the money that was put back in their bags, Jacob says, take double the money for all the grain, take extra gifts, right? Like maybe this'll convince him to let my other son out of prison, and we'll get some more food. And so they go back. Joseph sees that Benjamin is coming with them and sends his servant out to greet his brothers. and invite them to lunch at his place. And the brothers are terrified, right? It's just, again, trauma response. This is a good thing. Have you ever heard the statement when your boss says, I need to speak with you? There's two types of people: the people who say, I'm getting a bonus, and everybody else who says, I'm getting fired. And the brothers are all in that second category. They're like, oh man, he wants to talk to us. We are in so much trouble. We are in so much trouble. What did we do? What did we do? And so the servant is like, listen, guys, chill. Take a seat. It's all good. You're going to have lunch. And so they're reassured when Simeon comes out. He's let go of prison to come out and have lunch with them, and they take that as a really good sign, as one does when your brother is released from prison for lunch. And so Joseph gets there, and he asks about his dad. Of course, they don't know that he's asking about his own dad. They're just like, how's your father doing? And they tell him. And then he sees Benjamin for the first time in years, and comes and puts his arm around him and gives him a little kiss and says, God be gracious to you, my son. And in Hebrew, my son is Benny. You think maybe it was a nickname for Benjamin. It is today. But something about that moment and that connection to his brother from the same mother connects with him so deeply that he gets so overwhelmed with emotion that he has to sprint to his own room and break down in tears again. I wonder, did he get to a point where he sees his brother and he's seeing what his life could have been if he had been able to stay home? Is he seeing what could have been for him and so much regret? Is he seeing what could be further and seeing gosh, we could be brothers again? And it's so overwhelming to him because he doesn't know who to trust. He wants to jump into this relationship again, but he doesn't know if they're safe. And if you've ever been there, you know it is a little bit of hell on earth. To want the relationship to be healed, but to wonder if it's there yet. So as Joseph washes his face and collects himself, he comes back in and he seats them in the order of their birth. And they're all like, what in the world is going on here? Again, you can pick up on the 90s rom-com with the Shakespeare origin story. They eat this great meal together. In fact, they get drunk at lunch. And in this time, Joseph decides to try one final test. So what he does is Joseph has his servant go and secretly put Joseph's special cup that he used for interpreting dreams and things. He takes this silver cup and he hides it down in Benjamin's sack. And so he gives everybody their money back again. And he says, send them on their way. But Joseph tells his servant, wait 30 minutes and then sprint after them. And when you catch them, tell them somebody stole my cup. And so that's exactly what happens. The brothers set off for home. The servant sprints after him, and he's shouting, thieves, 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 stop. And the brothers are like, what's going on here? And he stops them, and he comes to them, and he says, one of you stole my master's cup. And the brothers, confident, right, in their sort of own goodness here, they're confident in their integrity, like, none of us stole a cup. What are you talking about, man? And he's like, I know there's a cup in that sack. Open them up. And they're like, man, we don't have any cups in our sacks. And he's like, yeah, there's a cup in one of those sacks. And so in boldness, they're like, listen, if there's a cup in one of these sacks, you can kill the person who you find the cup in. And the servant is like, chill. If I find a cup, I'll enslave that person. Take it down a notch. And so he searches the sacks, and sure enough, he finds the silver cup in Benjamin's bag. And everybody's in a panic, right? Everybody's in a panic. Benjamin's in a panic. The brothers are in a panic because their one brother is going to be sold into slavery like their other brother was, that they did that. Now they're trying to stop it from happening because they don't want to go back home and tell dad, oh, by the way, your favorite son was sold into slavery while we were in Egypt. Here's some grain. And in this moment where Joseph is trying to see, would they abandon their brother like they abandoned him? One brother steps up. Judah asks to speak with Joseph and says, look, we're in the wrong. Like, you found the cup in our sack. I don't know what happened, but look, God knows what happened. This is it. It happened. And he tells Joseph, I promised my own life for my brothers. And I can't go back home without him. My dad's going to die if I go home without him. I won't be able to live with myself if I go home without him. And so, would you, my master, accept me as a slave and let my brother go free? And as you know the story, it's this beautiful act of love. Nothing in this story from before would convince you that this moment was going to happen. This act of love, this sacrifice, this willingness to put his life down for his brother is the greatest love, like Jesus talked about. And so Joseph sends all of his servants and every attendant out of the room, looks at his brothers standing there who have got to be just wondering what in the world's about to happen. And he says, it's me, Joseph. And that is like the one thing they weren't expecting to hear. They're in shock. And so he says it again, it's me, your brother. I'm alive. And out of Judah's act of sacrifice, Joseph is able to not only reveal himself, but to say the verse we had at the beginning. That, look, God sent me ahead of you guys. Look at everything that God's done. God sent me ahead of you to preserve you on the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it's not you who sent me here, but God. But man, it's only through all the messiness and the back and forth and the ups and downs and the confusion and the secrets and the hidden revelations and the weeping that this happens. But Joseph reveals himself with tears and with kisses. And we see God brought this whole mess together under this big umbrella of his grace and his love. And so I see a lot of hope there. Because in fact, God has been working through the whole story to bring about that moment of forgiveness and reconciliation and wholeness. And it's been years. That's why it makes for such a great story, is it took years to get there. So if you're in the middle of it right now, you're right where Joseph was in his story. It was painful, it was messy, but God was with them. God was with them throughout all the messiness, all the uncertainty, all the confusion. And I love how Henry Nouwen says it. He says, I really want to encourage you not to despair, not to lose faith, not to let go of God in your life, but stand in your suffering as a person who believes that she is deeply loved by God. When you look inside yourself, you might sometimes be overwhelmed by all the brokenness and confusion, But when you look outside toward him who died on the cross for you, we might suddenly realize that your brokenness has been lived through for you long before you touched it yourself. And so I encourage you today to do that, to stand in the suffering, knowing that like with Joseph, God is with you, to stand in the uncertainty, knowing that like with Joseph, God is with you. Band, you can come on up. And so what we see in our story, this whole saga with the brothers, 4 chapters worth, back and forth, all sorts of names being thrown left and right. You're trying to track it on your who is this again, which brother is he, and all of it. What's the point? What Joseph's story tells us is to trust God. Trust him. When life looks profoundly different from what you had ever planned, trust him. When you don't know what tomorrow will bring for you, trust him. When your past keeps popping back up and putting itself right here in front of your face, trust him. When you don't know how or when or what or why to forgive, trust him. Jesus is your life, hidden with Christ in God, Paul tells us in Colossians 3. Jesus is your life. He knows your story. He knows the moment you're in your story. He knows the messiness. He knows the failure. He knows what it is to be betrayed. He knows what it is to forgive when you really don't want to. He knows you. And so let Jesus carry you through your pain, through your purpose. Let Jesus carry you through your trials and through your triumphs. Then you can say with Joseph that it is God who has done it. But only after. Only as you experience the mess. And even though it's a difficult path to walk. And so as we prepare ourselves to come forward for communion, we will come to a table today. And thinking about this story, it's like the table that Joseph invited his brothers to. Some of you may be fearful to come to the table today. What if this is found out about me? But Jesus invites you to come and receive, any of you. Joseph's brothers betrayed him, and they were invited to his table. Jesus invites you today to come as you are and receive. Jesus invites each of us, even though each of us fail him, to receive his forgiveness and his love. In our story, Judah, the brother, gave his life for the sake of the beloved child, Benjamin. And what we remember today as we come to the communion table is that you are God's beloved children. We are God's beloved children. And we have a brother who laid down his life for us so that we could live, so that we would not be enslaved to sin and death. He gave himself over for our freedom. He forgave us so that we too can forgive in all its messiness. And so we come together. We come together like Joseph could finally safely reveal himself in vulnerability. We come together so we can know each other. And so if you will, join me by standing, and I'll say a prayer, and I'll invite you up for communion. We'll have people praying at either side after you receive communion. If you'd like a prayer for anything you're experiencing, please stop and just share with one of them, and they'll pray with you. Pray with me now. God, you know our hearts. You know each one of us, all the pain that we face, all the hurt that we face, all the trauma that we carry, all the lack of forgiveness that we struggle through. God, would you meet us in this moment? We pray for those who are dropping off their children to go to school, that you sustain them and carry them through the joy and the grief of this time. Would you bless each person who's beginning to get back to school? Allow peace to be in their hearts and comfort them. And for all those who are sick or hurting, would you bring healing? Would you allow their hearts to be filled with your love? We pray this together in the name of Jesus. Amen. If you would greet each other, the handshake, welcome each other with a sign of peace. And then invite you to come forward and receive communion together. God bless you.